Good evening and welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the East Bridgewater Planning Board for Monday, January 6th, 2025. Happy New Year to all. It's our first meeting of the new year. Present tonight and acting on behalf of the board, we have our regular members Diane Phillips, Rachel Tedesco, John Lawler, Dwayne Crosby, Miles Heeger, our Vice Chairman Roy Gardner, myself, Kevin Riley, and our Associate Member Yvonne McCrae. Thank you all for being here. Always nice to see a full group. We have a couple of items to go through tonight. We do not have any available minutes. I apologize for that. That's on me. We'll have a set, or three sets actually, for the next meeting. I've not just had a chance to finish the review of the drafts, so we will do that come the first meeting in February. We have two matters, Form A applications tonight. One is for 1968 and 72 Plymouth Street. The other is for 318 West Union Street. I'd like to take up at this time the 318 West Union Street. That is an application by Greg and Diane Heeger. You all should have received copies of the plan, the proposed Form A plan. It basically would divide East Bridgewater Assessors Map 63 Lot 4 into a new Lot 1, which is comprised of 46,184 square feet, 1.06 acres with frontage on West Union Street, and then a large parcel A, 3.12 acres. A little too big. The parcel A, the note on the plan does reflect the fact that it would not be considered a buildable lot, and the intent would be that because of the lack of frontage on West Union Street, this would be combined with other land, perhaps at the rear, for purposes of compliance with frontage and other requirements. Just for the record, Mr. Heeger has left the room. That is will not participate in this matter. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members who will be present and voting with respect to this particular item. Comments, questions on this application?
If I could, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Gardner.
I did want to get this big enough so that we can see that note and actually read it. So the way this works is
There you go.
there's insufficient frontage on an existable public way for this to be a lot. It's also going to have to be accessed from some other location because the threshold access, as you can see on the plan, is several hundred feet of wetlands starting almost at West Union Street. So that remaining land, which is 312 acres, is not considered a buildable lot. It has to stay in common ownership with some other lot that has legal frontage. Now, right now, that lot is the lot behind it. The lot behind it is also owned by Heeger. That lot has frontage, I think it's 5 or 6 houses up Union Street. It comes around over to that. So, at least for right now, it would remain in ownership of Heeger. He could theoretically sell it to an abutter who touches that land who already has legal frontage. But that's a private land transaction that's beyond our purview in terms of a Form A plan. Other than that, that's really all I have.
So at this point, Chair would accept a motion to authorize endorsement of the plan entitled Plan of Land for Assessors Map 63 Lot 4 by Silva Engineering Associates. Plan is dated 1/2 of 25 and
So moved.
appropriate notes and such do appear on the plan. So that is a motion by Mr. Gardner to authorize endorsement of the plan. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Lawler. All those in favor of the motion so signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Unanimous vote of all regular members present and voting. record will reflect that Mr. Heeger has returned. The other matter that we have under Form A plans is premises at 1968 and 1972 Plymouth Street. Property owned by Edward and Beverly Smith. This would divide existing Assessor's Map 1, Lot 4 into a Lot 1 consisting of 35,595 square feet, a Lot 2 consisting of 35,018 square feet, and a Parcel A of 2.38 acres. That parcel, as noted on the plan, would be considered as not a buildable lot at this time. Both Lot 1 and Lot 2 do have frontage on Plymouth Street. There would be between them an 80-foot length reserved for potential future access to Parcel A if that were at some point to be approved for further development. I believe there are folks here in the audience that wanted to comment on this.
So
That is
if I
correct,
could-
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry. Pardon?
Could I just quickly go over a couple of things here for everybody's understanding of exactly where this parcel is? The parcel is outlined in red, fronting on Plymouth Street. There's wetlands to the back as well as actual water to the back. It abuts a subdivision, a planned open space subdivision or a cluster subdivision that was built in the 80s. I believe it's the 80s, might have been early 90s, called Ray Way. There's common open space in between this parcel, most of which, at least up to the end of this property, and I think back to this point, all belongs to Ray Way as part of the open space, as part of the cluster subdivision. So, that being said, I'll move on to the plan while you go ahead and,
So if you could just introduce yourself and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
happy to hear what you have to say.
Members of the board, my name is Frank McLean. I'm an attorney in town. I'm here on behalf of a resident of Ray Way, Mr. Aaron Pinsky. I have, because the planning board can never have enough paper, with your permission, an actual copy of the approved definitive subdivision plan that is for what we're calling Ray Way.
Thank you. Sir.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman and members, the reason I think this is relevant to go back to 2002, when this plan was approved, and obviously this is a copy of a recorded plan at the Registry of Deeds. If you look in the upper left-hand corner where it talks about the locus of this approved planned open space residential development, you'll notice that the locus includes the parcel that's being brought before you tonight for the Form A. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, that 4-acre parcel is included in the shaded locus. If that's the case, and that's what it appears of this recorded definitive subdivision plan, then this parcel is not an abutter. It is part of the subdivision plan, which means it's subject to all the terms and conditions of it, including, and note one at the very top highlighted, it says the locus falls in a planned open space residential development. This is part of the locus. It also includes in Plan 2 talking about that the parcels need to be at least 45,000 square feet to be approved. Now, obviously, this Form A is showing 35, but if this was included as part of the open space calculations under the original subdivision plan, without having those calculations, we don't know if there's any space available for additional lots. These 9 different house lots that have about 20,000 square feet, when you add in the other open space, they're supposed to come up to 45. Well, does that include this 4-acre parcel? It does on the locus shading, and if it wasn't needed, why was it included on the plan? So when you look at going back, and I know it's more than 20 years ago, but if it was used to calculate the space to approve this subdivision, it does not stand alone, subject to the Form A application. Instead, there's a, most likely, you are gonna find there's a special permit. It says in note 3 that because of being in the watershed, there's gonna need to be a special permit. I'm sure there's an order of conditions from the Concom. There are lots of restrictions on this parcel that would need to be fettered out and someone to look at. There would need to be calculations to know what went into the open space for the other lots that they ever got approved. We can't now cut it off and pretend, and I would have thought the same thing driving by. I assumed it was an abutting parcel until I looked back at the old plan and went, oh my gosh, it's included. It isn't
Can
an
we-
abutting parcel.
Let's stop and interrupt here.
Sure.
That's actually incorrect.
All right,
Our requirements under subdivision rules and regulations that the owner of an application and the locus show all of his land that's abutting to the subdivision. So that's all of the land that he owned at the time he was filing the subdivision plan.
so you're saying that therefore, although it's shown in the locus that with the notes that say the locus has to have the following things, this was excluded from it?
I didn't say that,
Okay,
but I will say that land is excluded from Ray Way, as in it says right on the plan itself that we endorsed remaining land.
it does say remaining land, but without, I would argue, without seeing the special permit and knowing whether that remaining land was included in the calculations to meet 45,000 square feet for the 9 different house lots, it's premature to approve it, and that would need to be checked.
We certainly would check that, and I did miss the fact that that is in the watershed protection district. I thought when the map was updated back in the mid-2000s, that map was changed, but we'll have to check that and make sure.
And again, due to, because the plan was only available Friday morning, the 3rd, obviously, we haven't had time to see what was on it and go to all the other town boards. But for what we were able to check, certainly thought it was worth bringing to your attention to make sure that this parcel that was included in the locus wasn't included in the calculations. Because if it was, that certainly impacts this plan.
I'm sure it wasn't in the calculations, but if it is still in the watershed protection district, all of the new lots would have to be a minimum of 45,000 square feet. So that part's correct.
All right.
So we'd have to actually verify that with the, and I don't have a good way to get that plan to scale on the screens here, but we'll have to verify that. I am sure that the remaining land was separate at all times and intended to be separate. So I believe all of the open space land that came up to the correct average for the land is in all that open space and parcels that are around the entire perimeter of the property.
Is sufficient and that any restrictions or any things of record don't apply to this parcel?
Well, they can't, because the way this plan is signed, it only applies to the subdivision. And the special permit only applies to the subdivision.
I wasn't clear from the plan that this parcel wasn't included in the subdivision calculations.
I think, just looking at the notes, for example, I think note 12 actually is relevant as well, which speaks to the establishment of a homeowners association and the conveyance of beneficial interests in parcels 1, 2, and 3 to the purchasers. So that would suggest to me that the house lots and the 3 parcels, would be, as Mr. Gardner is indicating, the
If those are
subject of the prior.
sufficient to bring the
Yeah,
20,000
yeah,
square
that's-
foot 9 parcels up
Up
to
to the
45,
45, yep.
then yes.
I mean, I'm looking at the numbers, I mean, it's, you've got some significant land there, you've got 1.22, 1.56, 1.22, so you've got probably 4 acres, 4 more acres of land there in those 3 parcels, excluding the remaining land of the 4 acres, so, you know, I think, you know, that's,
I do think the 2 street lots as well as that back lot, which was, at least in preliminary discussions, intended to be a 1-lot subdivision, would all have to be a minimum 45,000 square feet, if in fact that land is still in the watershed protection district.
Right.
So that part's definitely correct. We'd have to verify that, when our maps have been updated, I think 3 times since mid-2000, so we'd have to verify where that line currently
Yeah,
is.
and I haven't seen those.
It's also possible, because of where this is located, it's in the abutting town's watershed protection district. So we'd have to
Because
verify.
Bridgewater's right across the street,
Yes,
yes.
we'd have to verify that as well. Because we just ran into that situation on some land on Central Street, where that land almost, it's a parcel of land we auctioned off within the last several months. The land all falls within the watershed protection district of the town of Hanson. So, and as you know, obviously, because we're talking about that, there are restrictions of what you can do in a watershed protection district.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to confirm that before we can endorse this plan.
Would the matter be continued then to a further hearing where we might be able to hear that, or will that just be done?
So I'll leave that up to the chairman, but I would say, if that's the case, then the plan will have to be revised and resubmitted. A Form A plan has 21 days from the time it's submitted to the board. So if
For
it
you to
was,
take action, otherwise
Yes.
it's approved, yeah.
so if it's resubmitted, then that clock would start again at the resubmittal date.
so this was submitted on January 6th. So that
So
is,
the 21 days includes the weekends, so we take it for, it's gonna be,
If, we don't have to worry about that yet. We don't,
Monday will be the
Candy,
21
Candy,
days.
please. We don't have to worry about that yet because it hasn't been resubmitted yet. They'd have to resubmit it. If it's not in the watershed protection district, then I believe, I mean, I'll take a look at the special permit. I did look at it from the registry file. His name's not on the plan, so I'm not gonna come up with his name, but I did speak to a gentleman on Friday, I believe it was, at pretty good length. I did have the special permit on my screen at that point in time, just to make sure there was no constraints on abutting
That
land
it didn't
as part of the
affect this
special
parcel.
permit, yes. Because clearly the applicant had ownership and control over the entire parcel. at
entire
that
parcel
time.
at the time.
Yes, yes.
so,
So why don't we,
I don't,
our next meeting is in what, 2 weeks from tonight?
no, it's February, it's the next one, February 3rd. is
Well,
the
that's a
next
holiday, 2 weeks
holiday.
from tonight.
Yeah.
Nope, the holiday is February 17th,
You mean January 17th?
January 20th as well.
January 20th is the holiday, February 3rd is the next meeting.
Yeah, so January 20th is 2 weeks from tonight. That would be our normal meeting.
Right.
Okay. So I think that suggestion then needs to be, we put a motion on the table to endorse the plan as approval under subdivision control not required pending verification of the lot size requirements and, based on whether or not this parcel is still in the current zoning map as shown within the watershed protection district.
Okay, so that's, it's a motion by Mr. Gardner to authorize endorsement of the plan under subdivision control not required, Form A, given a verification of the fact that the premises in question does not fall within a watershed protection district, thus requiring larger lot sizes. Fair representation of your motion, Mr. Gardner?
I think so, and just for clarification, that will require both checking our own zoning map for the current watershed protection lines as well as the
Town of Bridgewater.
abutting town's watershed protection district. to make sure that it's not the abutting town's watershed protection district.
So there's the motion by Mr. Gardner. It's seconded by Mr. Heeger. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion so signify by saying aye
Aye.
and opposed. It's a unanimous vote of all 7 members, 7 regular members present and voting.
So, just some, real quick, during that discussion, a fairly lengthy discussion I had last week with the abutter, who I believe lives on the first house on the right-hand side of Ray Way, lot 1 on this plan, actually.
All right.
We did have a discussion about drainage. Drainage these days requires multiple different things that have to be approved and vetted through multiple different departments, but the most critical one is probably the Stormwater Management Act, which basically says that when this land is developed, they'll have to develop the land in such a way that runoff is contained on the site. If it can't be contained on the site, then it would require some kind of a drainage system built that would allow the drainage to get to the nearest wetland, but to get to the nearest wetland, it would have to have some kind of cleaning structure before you get there. That would most certainly be up to the Conservation Commission in a filing under the Wetlands Protection Act.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna jump down to D1, the Layla Estates matter. I would just represent to the board that, as per our decision at the last meeting, a letter did go out to the developer requesting a response within a 21-day period. And to my knowledge, that would expire somewhere within the next 10 days, maybe less.
If I could, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, sir.
I did have a relatively lengthy discussion with the developer.
Okay.
He did discuss the idea that he had discussed back when the subdivision was being approved of individual lights on each individual lot, and I reminded him that the requirement for that was for the engineer to come back with a proposal to do that, with a related proposal to waive the official street lights, if you will, i.e. the National Grid street lights. He did acknowledge that that was never followed through on, and that the 3 street lights are still shown on the plan. So I believe what we ended up with is he's gonna do 3 different things, all related to streetlights. He says he's gonna contact the current landowners of each of the homes, ask them if they'd be willing to accept a solar light at his expense to be placed at the end of each driveway at a location to be selected by the homeowner. Second option is to have his engineer look at the physical location of the electrical boxes, because it's underground electric, and to see where they could reasonably locate the 3 bases to connect to those 3 transformer boxes, because there'd have to be one off of each transformer box. The lights would have to be on the 2 cul-de-sacs, where they're shown on the plan now. Somewhere around that cul-de-sac, beginning at the throat of the cul-de-sac to the back of the cul-de-sac, because a street light would light the whole cul-de-sac regardless of where you put it around the circle. The street light at the intersection where the road takes a 90-degree south, that's part of the subdivision, there has to be a street light at that intersection that would light that intersection. Several different places that could be. That could be on one of the 2 corners on the south side, or it could be on a property line if there's a box on the property line on the northerly side of the street, opposite that subdivision. So he said he's gonna contact his electrical engineering guys that actually did the design. Because the way that's actually done is initial design, as I understand it, is done by the applicant, is passed over to National Grid. They modify it as required, turn it back to the developer then hires a contractor to do the installation work. So, 99% sure from the gist of the discussion we had, there are no streetlight bases in place right now. So it would require some construction work to be done to get wiring from wherever those transformers are most closely located to a base that would be installed in each of the
Roughly
three.
at those locations,
In those
yeah.
3 locations. He's also said he will contact National Grid's contracting department and tell them that he's in the process of doing that to try and expedite the time it would take to get that done.
Okay, so that being the case, I think we would just want to keep that then on the agenda for the next meeting and keep that, you know, on the front burner so that those folks know that,
Yes.
you know, something is brewing and they will have some lights sooner rather than later. The other 2 items, we'll take a little bit out of order too. We'll go to C2. At this point, that's the planning board response to the Board of Appeals or planning board notification to the Board of Appeals relative to the Meadowbrook Estates proposed development. As I've indicated before, my residence is such that I'm a legal abutter to that development, so I will be removing myself from the chair, and we'll let Mr. Gardner handle that, and once that is through, we will return and conclude our meeting. Take it away, Mr. Gardner.
Kevin, wasn't there a package with a clip on it that had a whole bunch of these?
Sorry, did I? Sorry. Swiped it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, so what we're gonna discuss right now is the 40B proposal for Meadowbrook Estates, which is currently pending before the Board of Appeals. And again, for the record, Mr. Riley has stepped down as chairman since he isn't a butter to the property. For further clarity, he lives in an actual 40B project on the other side of the street, Wayside Farm. We have drafted a letter. There is hard copies of that letters up here on the table. If anyone here is interested in having a hard copy, you're more than welcome to come up and take a couple. They're in the clip right there that says draft copy across it. Good, how are you? It's got text on both sides. It is a one-page document, though.
I printed this out.
Yeah. So again, for everyone's understanding, the way this works is ZBA has absolute and final control over whether the permit gets granted. It's based on a vote of ZBA after they're satisfied that they've got input from each of the boards that has to do with land development in the town of East Bridgewater, in our case, obviously, the planning board. I also expect, based on the lengthy and extensive process we went through when we did Wayside Farms, that all of the other boards, Conservation Commission, Board of Health, Police Department, Fire Department, they'll all file letters with the ZBA with their own recommendations. This is the first draft that we've actually talked about in a public meeting. There was an earlier draft. I've made a bunch of spelling corrections and a few other odds and ends like that. So some of the sentences read a little better, but. So, for tonight's plan, albeit we may make modifications during the discussion here on the table tonight, this letter will be submitted to the ZBA for their next meeting, which I believe is Wednesday night, with at least our preliminary recommendations. So in any case, let's quickly run through this, and the board just received this version earlier today as well, so it's a letter of official recommendations regarding the Meadowbrook Chapter 40B application. First kind of overall statement that's here is, in any approval with conditions of disapproval, issue 2 separate and standalone certificates of action. The first for the North Bedford Street portion and the second for the Winter Street portion. This is based on several readily observable differences clearly documented in the current application package. A, the two parcels are distinct and separate in multiple ways. The first is accessed solely via a 20,000 vehicle per day state highway, North Bedford Street, Route 18. The second via a low-volume residential road, Winter Street. Reason B, the proposed projects are very different in both design and site improvement requirements. The first is a very large multi-building, multi-story, high-density apartment complex. The second is a far more typical residential townhouse complex. The access egress, scope of parking requirements, and the overall design of the two projects are vastly different, and as such, should be handled as two separate projects. Specific recommendations for the North Bedford Street component. Number one, adjust minimum parking requirement to numbers more in keeping with industry standards for high-density housing that is not served directly by public transportation or within walking distance of some form of public transportation. Those parking numbers will be more in keeping with industry standards with something like minimum 3 spaces for every 2 single-bedroom units, 2 spaces for each unit containing 2 or more bedrooms, and an additional 25% spaces for guest, visitor, and overflow parking. All parking spaces should, item 2 is all parking spaces should preferably be behind the buildings fronting on North Bedford Street, with all parking on the west side of the buildings away from the street. This would allow for more distance possible for the queuing of incoming and outgoing traffic from the entrances to avoid conflicts on site, as well as minimizing possible backups on North Bedford Street. Item number 3. Propose in the findings a recommendation that Mass Highway require widening of North Bedford Street to provide turning lanes similar to what was done for the Equity Industrial Compass Medical Project further south on North Bedford Street. Lanes should be constructed along the entire Route 18 property frontage to allow southbound traffic entering development and means of moving out of existing southbound travel lane, and to allow southbound traffic a means to maneuver around vehicles seeking to cross the northbound lane to enter Wayside Farm development via Surrey Lane. Alternately, a center turning lane could be required to facilitate traffic movements in and out of the proposed development existing Wayside Farm community. Item 4, propose in the findings a recommendation that the southernmost driveway be aligned with Surrey Lane entrance to Wayside Farm community on the easterly side of North Bedford Street to improve traffic safety. That's a fairly traffic standard in today's guidelines is intersections that are going to carry any amount of traffic should be set up so they're either opposite each other or at least 200 feet in one direction or the other away. Where these two things are located, they would have to be opposite each other. Number 5 is limit overall height of the buildings to 3 stories, consistent with other similar construction in the town of East Bridgewater and surrounding communities. Winter Street component. Require that all infrastructure be designed and constructed to be compliant with the town of East Bridgewater subdivision rules and regulations. This is based on the facts as presented by the applicant that the units will be sold to private ownership and the common areas will be part of a condominium type agreement. This requirement will help ensure that the infrastructure meets similar quality standards of all of the other town roadways in the town of East Bridgewater. Item 2, require that all development be designed and constructed to be compliant with the town of East Bridgewater stormwater management bylaw. This is based on the facts as presented by the applicant that units will be sold to private ownership, common areas part of a condominium type agreement, and this requirement will help ensure that development improvements meet similar quality standards for all other projects in the town of East Bridgewater regarding stormwater management best practices. 3, require the wastewater systems connect to the town of East Bridgewater municipal wastewater system that has been approved, and it should say previously approved by town meeting, and is expected to begin construction in the spring of 2025. This would avoid the probability, and I intentionally use the word probability, that a failure of on-site Title V systems constructed in a marginal high groundwater area would result in the then owners being responsible for the future capital cost of the connections to that system. So that's where we are so far. So certainly open for discussion from any members of the board of anything else that we think we need to potentially add to that, but
I just had one question. Not that I have an opinion on this, but about the limiting the overall height of the buildings to 3 stories. Would that make it more difficult economically for for the owners of an apartment complex? Do we know that?
so that is to some extent interwoven with the parking issue, because as it currently stands with the number of units and the parking requirements they're recommending, based on the plans as reviewed by the town's consulting engineer, there actually is not enough parking right now. The town's consultant has clearly, in an email I saw today, that, you see if I can find the sentence. Yeah, it says, I also want to highlight that the proposed number of parking spaces do not meet the town's requirements for lots A, B, C, phases 3, 2, and 4 respectively, and lots A and B have the lowest parking ratio of 1.3
Oh,
per
okay.
unit.
Okay, so limiting it to 3 stories would also help with meeting the parking requirements?
So I think, given the wetlands lines and where all the parking is located, access, egress, and improvements,
Yeah,
there's really no place left to put cars. So they have to do something in terms of the number of units, I believe, because I don't see how they can, given the wetlands flagging that's been done at the site, I don't see any way that they can expand the parking requirement.
makes sense.
And they've actually acknowledged that in, I believe it was the first hearing, that they've basically used all of the upland that they can use based on the wetland flaggings, which has already been confirmed by conservation. Because they're not allowed to encroach the wetlands.
Right,
And they do have to have some setback from the wetlands, because they have to build some kind of a drainage system to at least initially capture the water before it enters wetlands, because they can't discharge directly into wetlands.
got it. Okay,
Now, my view, and I think that, because the engineering report that I was reading today, an update came out today, now has 43 pages of comments. A substantial number of those still haven't been addressed adequately according to the letter that came out today.
so it's still under a long review process.
I think there's still a lot of work to be done at this point, on both sides, not just the apartment side, but I think on the other side as well.
Okay,
Because what they've proposed for roadway on the other side doesn't meet, from my view of the plans that I've seen. And I'm not necessarily the best person to be reviewing those, because I'm not a land development engineer that does roadways, but they clearly don't meet, in my opinion, the current subdivision rules and regulations. And I think they should, because those landowners are gonna have to, through their condo association, maintain that roadway. We insisted that when Wayside Farms was done, that roadway be constructed according to subdivision standards. And again, the rationale behind that is that a homeowner, when they buy a home, ought to have a roadway that meets the requirements in general for the whole entire town. They shouldn't be buying a substandard infrastructure, regardless of whether it was granted as a standard subdivision or a 40B. That's public safety, access, and egress. Those are high-priority items in development.
Mr. Gardner, so
Yes.
what you were just touching on was whether or not those roadways would be maintained by the town. Is that something that we're gonna put in our, what we're gonna submit to them? Because I noticed that, it says here that it's unclear whether or not they're gonna try to keep them as private roadways, or if they're gonna have the town adopt them, which would mean that we would have to maintain them.
It's currently been proposed as a condo association, similar to Wayside Farms.
Okay.
so we're talking about Winter Street at this, right here?
That's the Winter Street side, yeah,
Okay.
right.
Also, there was something with, those dwellings not having the required 50-foot free space between buildings? Have they addressed that at all?
ZBA has a right to waiver that as part of 40B, so I don't think that's gonna change. Whether or not the very close spacing between the buildings is gonna be satisfactory from the fire department standpoint in terms of separation of, because I'm assuming they're gonna be basically wood structure buildings, just like your house or my house. They're gonna be either 2 units or 3 units. I'm still not sure of the total mix of those. It's not clear from the plans, but they are extremely close. And that's really a fire safety call.
Sure.
Anybody else on the board? No. We good for now? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. My name is Jerry Adams from 202 Sherwood Circle. I know at one of the town meetings, one of the big problems was during COVID, they did a traffic study. Has that traffic study been redone by the developer? Because I know with what you just proposed, with the construction of the streets, that would definitely help. But they basically came in with a traffic study during COVID, and that was supposed to be addressed. Has that been addressed?
I saw something today in the multiple emails going back and forth that said they did a new traffic count, and based on the new traffic count, they don't need to redo the traffic study.
So how can you go from COVID with nobody to everyday traffic and not need another
Because
time?
the actual counts they used, according to the research they did since that discussion, were actually done in 2019 and early 2020 before COVID.
So the original study was done before COVID?
The traffic counts they used were done before COVID.
Okay.
The study itself was done in late 2020 and 2021. But they did verify back through the state that the traffic counts on Route 18 that they used matched up to the ones that were done in 2019. The attorney who was discussing that back I believe both of the previous 2 meetings was unaware of that. And I did, and I'm sure this will come up at the meeting on Wednesday.
It's kind of
Right.
like
But
catch-22.
I did see on one of these emails that the traffic study is okay.
Now, when you say the traffic study's okay, who okays that? Is that you guys? or
That's our consulting engineering firm.
That we hire?
Yes.
Okay,
Well, we hire them, but they pay for it.
Uh-huh.
that's even better.
We now have a standard consulting engineering firm working for the town. It used to be a company called Equity Partners. They've since been bought out by a much larger nationally based conglomerate. But we're using this, it's the same people that we've been working with all along for the last, since just after COVID, actually. And they're the ones that have been reviewing this from day one. So it was on an email that I saw this morning, it might have been this afternoon. There was a whole bunch of emails today.
I think this proposal right here that's come up from the last meeting, by dropping them down to 3 stories and making sure they have the right parking, is definitely a step in the right direction.
We're working on doing our best to give a recommendation that will, as best as we can, within the confines of what 40B allows us to do,
Yeah.
end up giving us a better project.
Thank you.
How set back would the buildings be?
They're not set back very far, but at least in one of the drafts I saw, there was parking on the sides of the building as you're coming in. So, again, scale is a little bit hard to tell because of the size of the plans, but it looked to me like there'd be vehicles backing out into the entranceway where cars are coming in and going out,
That's not good.
which is a no-no in a high-density situation like that. If you look at most of the other high-density 40Bs, and there are a couple of them, the ones I've looked at the most, because I drive by them on the way to my son's house, are on 104, and one's in Bridgewater, and one's in Rainham, just on the other side of 495. You drive in a substantial distance of roadway before you get to parking spaces. That's actually an intentional design to try and make access and egress safer, especially because I think we all know in those kind of situations, especially initially, that 90% of the people that move into those are gonna be going to work at between 6 and 9 in the morning, and they're gonna be coming home between 3 and 6 in the afternoon. They're all gonna be coming in and going out at the, well, 80% of them are gonna be coming in and going out at roughly the same time. So with the number of units that would be, especially on the Route 18 side,
Right.
that's a significant impact on traffic. And right now, on a one-lane road, north and south, that doesn't work.
Mr. Gardner,
when-
you had also mentioned splitting this up into two separate approvals or recommendations. Was there one side of this that you thought they would be proposed to start first, being the high density or the
They've
townhouses?
actually already proposed, at one of the public hearings, I believe the last one, that their plan is to start the Winter Street side first,
Which is the private residences, townhouse residences.
would be the townhouses, yes, yes. So some other information that I learned, and I was unable to verify it formally in the short time since I saw it, but there is a commercial real estate company listing the townhouse side of the property for sale,
Already?
fully permitted.
They're in for a rude awakening.
I did try and get the link. There was a link on Facebook, as you would expect. And it actually had all of the documents. The whole link was there on Facebook. It was at best very misleading.
A little premature.
When I tried to go to the actual site, the commercial real estate entity site, it requires you to create an account, log in, and get vetted.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure they'd want me to do that. But in any case, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I think I say it at every meeting, that the majority of these, the day that permit becomes official, are sold to an equity company, some kind of real estate development equity company. Almost none of the ones that I'm aware of in Massachusetts, from what I could research, and the over 300 of these now that's been done, they're almost never done by the original landowner.
They sell it off.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons for that. I have a very, very strong opinion as to why, but, and that is because the profits on these projects are heavily regulated, quote, heavily regulated by the state. So if they take a piece of property that was purchased for $250,000 and then sell for $4.5 million to the developer who's actually gonna do the project, what's the baseline cost of the land? I don't know how they figure that out.
Ponzi scheme.
But we know from court cases that I've actually seen copies of that, that becomes very messy. But I think in terms of our specific jurisdiction, we'll start with this letter, and then as we all see what's going on, what's happening at ZBA, if we see other things as we move forward that we think need to address. Some of the gist of this is actually in that engineering review that I was reading today. In that email that came today, it was also in that parking's just not adequate on the.
They all said they could handle.
They're trying to use parking for what would be basically a downtown apartment building within walking distance to everything and within walking distance to public transportation.
We just don't have,
That obviously isn't that location.
Can two-story parking houses, or whatever you call them, parking lots, does that take less space? with that?
Not really. It actually takes more space because you have to have the physical construction of the walls and the supports. You know, on-ground, one-plane parking is the simplest in terms of space. Because you basically need a 9 by, I think it's, current standard is 9 by 18. So there's no physical structure with barriers and all that kind of stuff that also have to be there. Obviously, for a two-story or a three-story parking garage, you can fit more cars than you can on a single plane, but that's also a significant cost.
Yeah, some of these projects have parking under,
Yes.
ground level
Yep.
parking, yeah,
A couple of them in Mansfield.
yeah.
The ones in Mansfield, actually, I don't believe are 40Bs, but a couple of them in downtown Mansfield, where our football association meets, Football Officials Association meets, have parking underneath,
Yeah,
Under the building.
yeah.
under the building.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And actually at ground level in one of them. So the first unit is second story.
Yeah.
First story is actually parking. And there is no parking other than what's under the building. So the entire site was basically filled in with building, with the parking being the ground level of the building.
Well, that would make more sense in an urban.
Absolutely. Those two buildings are in downtown Mansfield, right by the train station. And that's a dual train station. That's both MBTA trains as well as the Acela run that goes from Maine all the way down to Florida.
Oh.
The high-speed train.
Mr. Gardner, one more question.
Yes.
You mentioned that there's a meeting Wednesday. What is that meeting for?
Candy may be able to confirm that, but isn't the ZBA's next public hearing Wednesday night?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that like the public hearing, like at the school type thing?
Yes.
That's gonna be, is it at the high school again? I think it is
Yes.
at the high school this time.
Is that to propose this?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else about the downtown 42B gonna be talked about Wednesday?
No, the post
For the
office.
downtown MBTA stuff?
Yeah,
No, those two articles, actually four articles, because there were zoning articles and zoning maps. Those were all defeated at town meeting.
okay. So that project's dead?
It could come back again, but as of right now, it would have to come back to town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone else on the board? Okay, so if it's okay with the board, then I could entertain a motion that we send this, we'll call it draft copy 2 letter to the ZBA.
Make a motion to do that.
And I
As of right now, it'll be as written in the current draft copy 2. The way the 40B works, we have a right to modify that as we go. ZBA will at some point tell us when the final cutoff date's gonna be for all input to them. They haven't told us that yet. They've indicated they're not close to that yet, but we'll see how that goes. So we have a motion on the table from Phillips, second Tedesco, to adopt the current draft copy 2 as our advice to the zoning board of appeals. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We'll show that as 7 in favor, none opposed. Yvonne gets to vote on that, because this is not a statutory item. This is an advisory letter for the, going to ZBA. At this point, I'll turn the meeting back over to our chairman, Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. So, last item on the agenda tonight is C1, the ADU update. And I think, did we touch last meeting on the guidance that, and I believe we did, that was put out by the state in the form of proposed changes to CMR?
Yes.
I thought we did. So that would become effective, and you had said.
So
yeah,
quick
go ahead.
update.
Yep.
Quick update. There is a public hearing this week. There was a public hearing this week at the State House regarding the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. We have seen preliminary draft guidance from Mass Housing. There has been, if I read the planner's guide email, or one of 5 that came out today, there is now over 1,000 comments from various communities in the state, mostly from either town planners or from town planning boards, and a good number from town building inspectors as to how they're gonna handle this. but they haven't changed anything yet. Now, during the official public hearing, we may get some feedback as to whether they've made any edits to the, I did look at the currently posted guidelines. They have not changed.
That's for public housing?
This is for what's called accessory dwelling unit. This is the ability of anyone who owns a single-family home in the town of East Bridgewater to build a second unit. So that currently hasn't changed. It's currently oversimplified, but it can be up to 900 square feet. It can be part of the existing home, in addition to the existing home, or a separate standalone building on the property. We believe, providing that building still meets zoning requirements for setbacks and things like that. It can be in, owned by a principal with the unit rented out to someone. It can be a family, the building could be owned by you, and you don't live there, and you rent both units out to someone. Effectively, for lack of a better term, the state wouldn't like to hear this, but a two-family rental. So none of that appears to have changed yet in the guidelines that the state has issued. They have committed to have the guidelines out before the building inspector has to start issuing building permits on February 2nd. Because that's still the official date that the law takes formal effect.
I think that, from the comments, some of the comments, not only from a zoning standpoint, but I think the other major component is from a building code standpoint, how these things are gonna be handled. As I think we've said at these meetings, since this has come up, I mean, there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered in a relatively short period of time on this thing, so we'll see how it, and I think obviously depending upon what the final is, we may have to look at what we did at the special town meeting and perhaps
Yes.
modify that as necessary, but.
Yeah, we did update our bylaw for accessory units at the special town meeting in the fall. It's not clear that some of what we did to modify that is potentially in conflict with the state guidelines that are now out. So there is a possibility that, I think it would have to be an annual town meeting that we would be making further modifications to that bylaw to make it so that it doesn't conflict with state law.
I did hear that they were proposing to have house designs on the site, so available house designs.
The Mass Housing has proposed putting a suite of small 900 square foot houses, designs on their website.
Teeny homes,
Yeah, for lack of a better word, yeah.
Which,
those little teeny homes that come up with, tiny homes.
I had
Same idea.
I think that, as Roy indicated, it's pretty clear that there can be no owner occupancy requirement. That's, I
That's the
think, a
big
pretty
change,
definite.
right?
But the other question, I think that, still remains out there, is in terms of whether there can be some definition given to the term short-term rental, so that, can you do this on a monthly, 6 month, whatever kind of basis? Does it have to be a longer term? I think that's one of the things that we tried to do, was to make it so that, they were a little bit longer term, and I think that's yet to be decided as well, so.
Yeah, so in the webinar that I sat in on about a month ago, it was very clear that Mass Housing does not want these to become vacation rentals in the summertime for everybody that's got a single-family home, especially in certain locations, the Cape being an obvious one. But all of the waterfront properties, all the way from Cape Cod all the way to the North Shore. They're not trying to generate a cash-generating source for current homeowners
Yeah, I mean, I
that
think
they
that
can rent for high rates.
the objective is to satisfy a housing shortage, not a
They want permanent
vacation
housing.
rental shortage, I think, so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So to be continued, as they say. Other matters to come before the board tonight?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Motion made by Mr. Gardner, adjournment, that is at 8:02 PM, seconded by Mr. Gainer. All those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
And opposed. Thank you, and good night.